Hello, my name is Stefan Konrad. I'm the founder of AI Swiss. Welcome to the community episode today. What's the topic of today? Your future job, the new role of an AI engineer. I'm really happy that David is joining us as a presenter. He joined SAS, the company which is also sponsoring this episode today, in 2020 as a solution architect. But lucky boy, he joined the Applied AI and Modeling SAS R&D division to focus on delivering insights to customers in 2024. I'm jealous. David, but now it's yours. Take the floor and tell a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So as was said, I joined SAS almost 5 years ago at this point, but I worked at an insurance company before that. So I actually have worked at a real company, not just a software company, solving real problems there. And then
So I need to stop you. A real company, not a software company.
yeah, there is
What a
people
statement.
that if you only work at software companies, you have a warped sense of the world.
Okay, that's the nerdy thing, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
And yeah, as you said, I joined SAS R&D about 9 months ago at this point. This is a brand new division for us that is exclusively focused on turning field knowledge that we gain through consulting projects or direct customer engagements and turn them into standalone models that people can consume, pay as you go, software as a service style. And when that unit was spun up, I was like, I need to join. This is exactly what I love to do, building real use cases and delivering value. And in my free time, I actually, I like to watch movies and things like that, but kind of my preferred thing to waste away a weekend maybe is to go to a hackathon. Just try out new ideas, meet new people. Last year I did one around VR, with which Meta hosted before the big gaming conference, the Gamescom in Germany. I've never programmed VR before, but it was a fun weekend where you learned lots of stuff, and yeah, that's a fun hobby of mine.
Just tell me one thing. Do you need to be a developer to join a hackathon, or is it also for other people's other professions?
It's definitely also for other professionals. It kind of depends on, with the game ones, there were a lot of designers in there as well because you need great assets to showcase what you're building.
Yeah.
And also we had a musician there that built custom music for people. We had storytellers in there that just helped write what the game would be talking about, right? So it really depends on the hackathon itself. I've been to one at an insurance company where people from the business units joined. They were like, we have an idea, but we can't code. But we have an idea, we have the business expertise, and they just started to work with the team that they met there. So
yeah, interesting. So I was just thinking because now we have a filmmaker and an architect with us today.
yeah.
So definitely I know it simply in the same context. So sometimes startups are built from hackathons, right? So you find people who have an idea but can't code and find other people who can code to work together on one common project, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thing. So still people are joining. Welcome everybody. We're just in the warming up phase, so don't worry, you haven't missed something critical. I would say important things, of course, but not critical. Okay, David. So just continue. Happy to listen to your presentation.
Thank
And
you.
what you have to share with us.
Gonna grab the screen. Whoops. Well, just went away. Let me try that again. Did that work?
Yes, you took over.
Perfect. Yeah. So just I mentioned SAS kind of, we are a we are a startup. Essentially, we were founded in 1976. We are still led by our founder to this day. He still comes into the office 3 times a week at 82. That's quite impressive to me. But we, of course, also are in the DACH region. We're all over the world, but especially in the DACH region for 40 plus years at this point. And the image you're looking at is actually our headquarters here in Heidelberg in Germany. And my office window is exactly here. So this window behind me is this window on this image here. And SAS provides a data and AI platform. We have been doing this for almost 50 years at this point. Of course, what we called a platform back in the 70s has nothing to do with what we call a platform today. Technology changes, but the fundamental questions didn't change. And that also kind of led me to this presentation when brainstorming ideas. What could be interesting to talk about is exactly that the kind of job descriptions, the types of things, how companies think about their data and how they generate value out of it is always changing, right? Like back at the end of the 90s, the early 2000s, people started data mining and feel like, yeah, there was SPLS, there was, of course, SaaS products, but there was all these things around data mining, and then it moved it more towards data science and data wrangling with the Hadoop days. There's always something new coming up. There's always new tools being introduced. And the AI engineer is kind of the new involvement out of that. And we will be talking about kind of what an AI engineer is. Is there even a career in this, or is this just a fad that's going to die off? Then we'll look at some real interactive stuff, one kind of hobby project that I built, and one more real customer use case that I built. And then I have some tips for you, but also if you work within a larger organization, kind of how to get things going in that respect.
It is
And
interesting that in the past we had a session with some of your colleagues as well, talking about model ops, right?
yes, yeah,
As a role model which just emerged out of nothing. And obviously the AI engineer coming up. And people, you probably saw my post this morning where I mentioned how long will we still be coding, right? Or is AI taking all the coding stuff from us? So I'm really curious to see what AI engineer means in that context, and how are there still jobs, and what kind of jobs are there?
yep. So I like to start things off with a bit of a definition, and interestingly enough, I found the best one out there on Coursera, and fittingly enough, they also offer a course system around this, but they really talk about this being someone that puts together AI, machine learning into actual applications and systems.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the main differentiators for something like a data scientist, where we heard a lot about people building lighthouse projects, right?
Yeah.
And the issue with a lighthouse is it's not connected to the coast oftentimes, or it's not connected to the main organization. So people built out cool use cases, cool demos, and then they never connected into the organization. It might be because the IT department was unable to pick it up, or the data scientists, they just built a cool Jupyter notebook that nobody could put into production, really. There were a plethora of reasons why this oftentimes didn't work. That's also why this engineering part is kind of becoming more and more interesting to companies, as less about the actual, oh, you know the ins and outs of every algorithm, or you know how to tune a model to the nth degree to make it absolutely perfect. That is becoming less and less relevant now, and we'll talk about why. But putting things together, thinking about how they can behave in production, how you can tie these systems to business KPIs at the end of the day, that is where things are really starting to change, and where there's also a shift in mindset necessary.
So that's interesting because when we started ASBIS years ago, first we really had those discussions, right, with data scientists being isolated on specific areas and outside the daily operations, so to say.
Yeah.
So you see really a shift, so it's getting more and more part of our organization itself. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. And there was this, it's probably been 9, maybe 10 years at this point, this famous Google paper that showcased where do data scientists actually spend their time at, right? And there was like the small box of ML, and there was 1,000 things around it that
Yeah.
actually consumed more time. And I think this is kind of a reality adjustment that we are seeing here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you look for the term AI engineer, and I used Stepstone for specifically Germany, I found over 300 current job offerings going from associate all the way to like principal roles, so really covering the spectrum. And when I looked at Indeed.com, they allow you to search globally easily. I found over 16,000 job openings. So even if maybe the specifics of these roles are not fully determined yet, they are very much, if you read through them, it can be anything from a Kubernetes administrator to a data scientist, right? There's a wide array of what companies are looking for, but they are starting to move towards this term, is something that I observed. And what really changed is November 2020, and that is the release of ChatGPT, famously. And what that really shifted is that suddenly business units were interacting with AI in the first time freely on their own home computers. And they started to realize, hey, I can give this thing a task and it can help me with it, right? Even if it's just the standard use case of, hey, summarize this super long email that nobody wants to read, give me 3 bullet points, help me understand what's going on here. And that's where I found a lot of business units suddenly going to IT and demanding, I want access, right? And that's in the press a lot talked about these famous company name GPT, right? A lot of companies have rolled these out just because of that high demand. And I don't think there has ever been a time before where business units essentially told IT, I want this AI thing, right?
Yeah.
Before it was always like, what's this computer vision stuff? Like it was always like, it might have been cool, but nobody really, the business units didn't have a direct application for it. Or if they had to go through lengthy approval processes. They had to find someone to help them with it. So this really changed how people are thinking about it. And
On a
especially,
side note,
yeah.
because you're just talking about people going to the IT department saying, I need access to it. It's on an EU level, you now need a driver license, so to say, for using AI in a company. So this is crazy stuff because I see all those kind of job vacancies looking for teachers of AI popping up everywhere, and everyone is required to have driving license for AI, whatever that means, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. What also really changed was something that was a very niche topic in machine learning, and that was language understanding. Uh, I would especially say for like the non-English languages, right? So German, French, Italian. There were some models out there that could do stuff, but none of them were especially good. That's really, if you were not doing English stuff, I built a prototype back in university comparing contracts against each other, and that my first step was translate the contract into English and then start work with it,
Yeah.
because it just didn't work out in German. So that really accelerated how people can work, because
Yes.
in your day-to-day job, a lot of data is probably just in emails, in customer feedback forms, in documentation. There's so much stuff just in regular text that wasn't that easily accessible with traditional NLP. Or you had to be you had to be an NLP professional that built these rule-based systems that try to extract keyword-based topics from a text. So that's also something that really changed.
Yes. I thought
And
also interesting that becoming a mass phenomenon at the time it ChatGPT released, it was like the iPhone moment, right?
yeah,
When you
yes.
saw, okay, there's something which is, oh, this iPhone is completely different from the smartphones feature phones I used to, right? So I personally was just amazed by being so used to Google and asking questions on Google, and now being able to ask a personal questions, getting an answer, and more than the answer itself. So even more things than just replying to my initial question. That was just like, wow, that was shocking. So testing it with sometimes even psychological questions. Can you help me? I'm feeling depressed. And getting just a list of what you can do. This was just amazing. So with that coming mainstream now, changing the thinking of the people, how does that affect the job market and what you're doing?
Yeah, it definitely shifted the conversation away from IT and data scientists because business units are just demanding it. So the audience you are essentially talking to changed from people when you said F1 score, accuracy, KS Yoden, where like everybody, well, yes, I know. I've done all the formulas in university, completely shifted to people that never heard these terms
Yeah.
and aren't interested in these terms, right? Because
Yes.
they realize they can do something with it and they just start using it. And that one thing is that companies had to adjust. A lot of knee-jerk reaction was chatgpt.com is blocked at your internal company, right? That was kind of the first reaction. And then people starting to slowly roll out these tools in a way that guaranteed that the data stayed with the company. So people starting to adjust.
Yes.
And now the questions are more and more shifting away from people have gotten used to I take my email into ChatGPT, I ask it questions, I take the output and move on with it. That conversation is, I mean, it's still ongoing for some companies, but most companies have essentially given such a tool to their employees. Now the conversation is shifting towards how do I put that into our processes, into our business applications, so that it's not a one-off, but it's a repeatable topic that's coming up. This is also where the term LLM ops, this is kind of a sub-genre of model ops or machine learning ops, kind of a very special niche around LLMs kind of started to pop up.
Mhm.
You also mentioned coding, right? The task that kind of maybe at some points was thought of a very demanding and skillful job has been reduced to, in a lot of cases, just give me a function and it does 90% of what I need it to do. Right? And
Mhm.
suddenly people who couldn't code before now can code. Um, Maybe not always up to the quality. There is issues, of course, but it's a huge step change. And for developers that can code, it's also a huge acceleration. So I sometimes feel like I'm now doing the job of two just because I have this tool at my hands. I can move that much faster. I can iterate more quickly. I can have it write comments for me, right? Who likes to do that? So there is a lot
Mhm.
of tooling that's now available to developers. And also, it's moving beyond things like just LLMs. So we are moving into a world of having foundational models. I'll go more into that in the next slide. And with that, we also saw the rise of the prompt engineer. We saw the rise of LLM ops. So suddenly, how you talk to these models makes a huge difference. Right? There was a KitKat ad that essentially said they kind of mistook misrepresented some study results saying if you tell the AI to take a break and then it gets a better output. That was kind of a rephrasing of the chain of thought concept where you tell the LLM to reason through every step. They kind of took that on, put that into a marketing campaign and rolled it out in North America, which is like KitKat using AI in their ads. And that is the talking point, right? It wasn't that AI generated the ad. No, this was an ad talking about AI. And so that's the kind of world we are suddenly living in.
Yes.
Talking about not just large language models, if most modern large language models that are kind of out there are based on an architecture that is called transformer. And what transformers are actually really, really good at is being zero shot, meaning you give it a problem and it gives you the correct answer back in the first go. One of my favorite tools around this is called SAM2, Segment Anything. It's a model released by Meta. And this is a tool or a model that can, you give it an image and you highlight a point, you click a point and you say, keep track of it. You let the video run and it will give you masks for that whole video. A process that was laborious to no end, right? That's where services like Amazon Mechanical Turk, there's whole billion-dollar companies built around this data labeling task. Now this model just does it for video. You click once and then just do the rest of the video and give me the labels back. So that's an insane value unlock. There's also Chronos is a model that has been released by Amazon. It's a time forecasting model, and you can just give it your time series and tell it forecast the next couple of lines. Again, forecasting has been the discipline of a very niche group of people, forecasters. And they still beat these models, right? In most cases, humans still can beat these models, but of course they are always getting better. And they are also just another tool in our belt to use. If we know they are out there, we don't have to. Now, I want to integrate some. For example, I built for my hometown, I built a model. Right, let me roll back. In Germany, you can get the current gas prices through an API for free if you are kind of for your private use. And that API I use to pull out the data of my local town all the time to see, okay, where should I go and fuel up my car for the cheapest price? And then I thought, hey, let me forecast and see how predictable these different gas stations are in changing their prices, right? Can I kind of anticipate when they will go to a lower price again to then easily say, okay, I see it's not that cheap today. My tank is kind of low. Tomorrow morning, it will probably be cheaper. Okay, I'll go tomorrow morning, right? And I have data fueling that. And for my forecasting, because I have no experience in forecasting algorithms, I just use a Chronos model to do that for me, which is pretty nice. But there is
That's
also
just a practical question with all those models, and some names I haven't heard before, to be honest. How do you keep up with the changes? And do you think it's the job of an AI engineer to just be permanent, checking out new models? Or
I think being chronically online is an important bit as an AI engineer, to kind of keep tabs on maybe a couple of subreddits or a couple of Twitter accounts that you follow. A lot of LinkedIn is also based around this.
Okay.
Or my favorite news site is Hacker News by Y Combinator,
Yes.
to close that loop. And they are always talking about the kind of new and interesting models as well. So
Okay. So I didn't check Hacker News on Indeed, looking on LinkedIn a lot, and Reddit is just like old times coding.
yeah.
Okay.
But to not kind of dismiss methods like AutoML or hyperparameter optimization, right? These are also tools that are more and more available. If I have data and I know a target variable, I don't build out the algorithm. I don't choose a specific algorithm. I just give it to the machine and let it do its thing. These are kind of classical machine learning approaches that give me a fully done model, maybe a gradient boosting model. But here what we see is the amount of knowledge I need to train such a model is becoming less and less. Now, of course, it's always, if you know the kind of the base level of everything, you are better at your job, right? You can build better models if you invest enough time. But oftentimes what you need to do in a business scenario is have a quick MVP, test it. Does that idea actually work in production? And only then go back and start to invest more time into it. If you have to invest 3 months into your first kind of prototype that business units can give you feedback on, it's probably too expensive to justify doing that. So being able to quickly get going is very valuable. And then it's becoming less about one model or one part of that, but it's becoming more and more a system of tools that we have to pull together. So with an LLM, there's already two choices you have to make. Which LLM are you going to use? And what is the prompt that you are feeding that large language model? So the default kind of in most minds is ChatGPT. But then you might have, we have customers that have such sensitive data that they can't move it off their premises. So they can't even leverage the cloud. So we are then talking about, okay, we have to use an open source model that we can deploy on-prem. So there might be parameters around that. There's also, of course, different costs. The GPT models are not necessarily the cheapest ones. There's cheaper alternatives. There's also things like latencies, how quickly can they respond to my, there's a whole bunch of factors on how you choose the correct LLM. And you might also have noticed LLMs have personalities almost, right? If you use Anthropic's Claude models versus ChatGPT, how they answer is very different in the kind of nuances, how they talk to you, how they interact with you. So I find we do play Dungeons and Dragons from time to time, and I'm the dungeon master most of the time, so I tell the story there. And I use the Claude models to ideate plot ideas with me. I found ChatGPT is way too analytical for my needs, and I want someone that is going more off the path and is kind of more of a storyteller when I'm trying to talk to it.
So basically voting for Tinder for LLMs, right? Find a good match.
If only it were that simple, yes.
I was just recently I monitored the news, and there was some saying about Microsoft changing their strategy a little bit with OpenAI.
Yes.
So with all the LLMs out there, I think they're growing a lot, but they're also, you can run into a huge vulnerability. So I generally use ChatGPT a lot, but now I recognize that I might have to be able to jump on another wagon, right?
Yep.
Because if out of a sudden the big players pouring a lot of money into it, say we don't spend any more money and we have to do a different way, I'm just might get into trouble with using an LLM as part of an architecture of my workflow, for example. So I think this is also a huge point here. Do we have some experience with DeepSeek?
Yes, yes. I think that was, you mentioned ChatGPT being that huge kind of iPhone moment. It almost felt like that again with DeepSeek, R1 especially, because suddenly when your family starts asking you about new model releases because they read it in the paper, you're like, okay, this might be bigger. And I wrote a paper on it. You can message me on LinkedIn if you're interested, kind of explaining also who DeepSeek is and all of that. And I think the post around that is one of my most viewed posts on LinkedIn of all time. So that was a huge explosion. and these kind of so-called reasoning models, right? That's essentially models that have this chain of thought built in. So really giving the LLM more time to explore the answer space, to think through every step and then come back with a summary answer. That is something where this Chinese company, DeepSeek, when they released their R1 model, they kind of were like, oh, this can also be done through open source, right? And they are actually quite good. That really shifted the conversations around that, because before that, we really only had the OpenAI O1 model family, and O3 was kind of on the horizon.
Okay, so with all the geopolitics at the moment, with Trump getting crazy, I saw that Switzerland also brought up a large language model, Swiss GPL, I think it's called.
Okay.
You haven't tested?
No, that one I haven't tested.
Okay.
The European one for me is still Mistral from France. They don't have a reasoning model yet. I'm sure they're working on one, but they are also, again, an interesting alternative to just check out if you are interested to see kind of how these models behave. And I think they also have a generous free tier to use. So yeah.
One security aspect with LLMs I would like to mention, because this is also role affecting for the future jobs. I'm also running an association in Switzerland, Bern, which is called the Swiss Disinformation Research Center. So it's all about disinformation. And recently, it was, I think, 2 or 3 days ago, I found that news article hinting about that huge system of websites working together to so to say hack large language models on the content side, right? So
Yes.
one of the questions which came up was, how do you come up as a company or show up as a company in ChatGPT or LLMs? And this is, of course, if a lot of probability exists that what you're saying is mentioned at a lot of places. So how do you hack that? You create those places, but change the narrative. Yes. So there's a security aspect with LLMs. On the side, I was not really expecting at that moment, but I just came aware of.
Yes. Yeah, it's called AI poisoning.
Yeah.
And they also people trying to spread intentional misinformation to make these models less capable, right? To almost reduce their capabilities. That's an ongoing data quality fight, I would say, that these big training labs have with their new models. Yeah.
I would say that the job doesn't become easier.
No, yeah, absolutely. Other tools that I have in here, I will kind of go over, but of course, having access to databases and now these new vector databases that allow you to take answers or documents, put them into a large vector space, and then find close association, for example, to have citations. That's often what a lot of companies use, to have a chat with it, and then you ask the system, hey, what's our policy on X? Then you want the LLM to give you a summary, of course, but you still need that level of confidence that you can say, okay, let's click on that little number as you would with any scientific paper and see where it pulled that answer from, right? That's what a lot of people do. But also, what companies do to reduce costs is they embed the answers that the LLM gives us. Then when a new question comes in, you check, hey, was this question or a very similar question already asked? If so, let's just give them the old answer again, right? That's faster, it's cheaper, it's an all-around kind of win for them. That's what most people think about what retrieval augmented generation is. Another form of retrieval is the classical web search, right, where you just retrieve knowledge from the web, or you might run something like a summary on a table to get more information about that table and feed it to the LLM as well. So there's a bunch of ways to do retrieval, and a newer topic that kind of came more into fashion last year are knowledge graphs. Something we are very familiar with. Anytime you search on Google and they have those little cards in there telling you the answer already, that's kind of what a knowledge graph is, and integrating them with LLMs can of course help to guide the answers to the answer we want. Because I always like to say LLMs, they don't hallucinate, right? Hallucination is what we call the answers we don't like. To the LLM, there's no difference. It's all the same. It's not like there's a special flip or a special switch that gets flipped in the model that says, now I hallucinate, right? They look the same from the model perspective. So we really have to ensure around the model to reduce those with techniques like that.
Yeah, I just wonder that one thing is missing in the list, maybe on purpose. So agents.
Agents, yes, that is one of the kind of topics what a system could be, right? An agent could be a system, because at the end of the day, there is no clear definition of an agent right now, what that really is. And also an agent could be just a combination of an LLM going through different prompts, trying to categorize the text, and then triggering different actions based on that. Or it could be, now I call this API, that API, or I retrieve some data from a database. So an agent is kind of pulling on these pieces and putting them together in an actionable fashion, or letting the LLM figure out which part of these pieces it should use. That's why I don't call out an agent here, because the agent is one of those systems.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, this is kind of what we observed with companies, how they started using it, right? You just start using the LLMs as is, and then you kind of start to integrate them more and more into your business applications. Some companies even going into the space of fine-tuning models that they, like LLMs, you can, at this time last year when I first helped create with the slide, you couldn't really train commercial models. Now that's also all opened up at this point. But if you collect your own data, you can create subversions. So we could, for example, have a ChatGPT version that's a perfect architect, right? We're giving it architectural knowledge, how you communicate with customers, and then have a fine-tuned version that really is a specialized architectural LLM. It might lose some of its general capabilities, but because of that, it gets better in that one specific area, almost like we're turning it into a bit of a specialist, which can be helpful. But as you move down the stack, this is, for that first level, you don't need an AI engineer. And even the second level, you don't really need an AI engineer. But as you especially start to integrate more data sources into it, or you move into that agentic space, that is where an AI engineer that really thinks about that whole process, what's going on here, and how should the different parts fit together. Why did I choose this LLM over all the other LLMs? Why am I using, do I have to buy a new vector database? Or is there maybe something I could do with Postgres, which the company is already running, right? There's a million questions to be asked as these new technologies are introduced, that an AI engineer can help shape. So this is oftentimes, it's not the green field in that you operate. It's always a brown field, I would say, within companies that you have to integrate. But it's a space where there's a lot of movement, where there's a lot of decisions to make and to help shape how the company is set up for the next couple of years. Let's see how fast it goes. Maybe next year we are all coming together and only talking about we all don't have a job anymore. It's all the LLMs now. I don't think so, but who knows?
Mm-hmm.
With all of that, I think kind of the one topic is we already touched on this. How do you stay up to date, right? Change is constant in this space. It always has been, but the pace is starting to accelerate. But when I look at also the historical things and now what's going on, three things are kind of constant. If you have curated data that's good, that's quality assured, you always have an advantage. Now that might realize in something like you are able to fine tune a model, something nobody thought about 20 years ago, right? But if you invested in data quality back then, you are now reaping the benefits. If you collect the right data, you are reaping the benefits. Model selection, we already touched on things like, which LLM can I even use? Can I use a proprietary model that runs in the cloud? Or do I have to use an open source model? Or it's just which model is best for this specific task? Doing things like prompt engineering, kind of the new experimentation. Instead of running model tournaments, we are now running prompt tournaments, maybe. And then, of course, keeping track of how these things are being used, right? That's not only a regulatory topic, especially in the EU, but it's also kind of putting the value that you create in this process back to the business. Like even that monitoring, right? How much time did it save? Did it improve the quality of service? Is the customer satisfaction going up? All these different metrics, kind of see how are things performing and how are they behaving, and also how are our users interacting with it, right? Are they suddenly changing how they engage with our company because of these new tools? And how should we react? Is there a business opportunity in this? Right? A lot of pharma companies suddenly realized that Ozempic, which wasn't a weight loss drug at all, but then they suddenly saw online people in chat forums talking about this being a miracle weight loss drug. And then they started to adapt, right? How they are thinking about it, trying to find alternative approvals by the FDA because of that. And I think how people, because they're starting to interact differently with us, there might be new business opportunities for companies. So we talked a lot, right? Let's see a bit of practical stuff. And the first one I'm going to show is a personal project of mine, which we touched on. Hey, how do you keep up? My way of keeping up is writing a newsletter that I publish internally. So this isn't publicly available, but kind of I've come into the habit over the last year now. Every week I write this newsletter that I call Last Week in Generative AI. There's a very famous podcast called Last Week in AI, which I can recommend, and I kind of made a play on their name. But one part that I had in here that I thought was kind of fit for public consumption were these news bullets. Just like 1 to 3 sentences and a link. That was kind of my motto for news. And I was like, okay, but who wants to get another email in their inbox, right? Who wants to kind of subscribe to that? So I thought of, hey, could I turn these into YouTube shorts? This was before all these text to video models, so there was no Sora or Playwright or however they are all called. So I thought, hey, let me pull together a bunch of scripts, right, and talk about it. I haven't shared. I'm going to show you the first result that I had and then an additional add-on. I didn't share with sound on purpose because I can't hear them anymore, but to give you an impression of the structure. Here you can see a screenshot. You can see an image that was generated. You can see some kind of text on top of it, and also the description underneath it. All of that, plus the voice, and there's some music generated for this. All of that is AI generated. Now, the first iteration was what you are looking at here. These images look kind of meh, because they were generated with, I think, DALL-E 1 at the time. So let's look at this. I think this was then DALL-E 2 or 3, where the images look a lot more vibrant already, right? And that's also kind of an indicator of these things constantly getting better and more interesting to kind of look at. And how this works is that I pulled together a bunch of different tools into one script. And the kind of first task, of course, for me was actually the part that took the most amount of time to write is we saw these news bullets right here. So these, I didn't want to rewrite them. So I wanted to give this file to the script and essentially say, go. And the hardest part was keeping myself accountable to write them in such a way that I could easily parse them out of that text. And then for each bullet, I go through a process. And let's just jump to the kind of end of this. Let's see, where was it? It's been a while that I stepped through this code. There we go. So this is not a Python webinar, but let me jump back down just to kind of give you a rough overview. So for each news text that we have, I first use my text-to-speech. For this, I used a service called 11 Labs because they let you create custom voices as well, and they have an API. Then after I have created that audio, I say, hey, retrieve the length of that audio. Because my idea was every 5 seconds, I want a new image on the screen. Okay. So next thing was generate music. For this, I used an open source model called AudioGen from Meta. I essentially tell it, hey, please generate music this long. And give it back to me. And then first step, combining those two audio tracks together, kind of having the music at like 5 or 10% volume and the speech at 100%, right? So it's just a bit of ambient music, as you often find on YouTube. And then the next step was, okay, now we need images, right? And to create images, I need prompts to get images out of that. So I took the amount of time that my video has and then essentially say, hey, generate N prompts for me. So giving it the full news text to the LLM and say, come up with image prompts for this. And then I do a screenshot. The screenshot is essentially opening up the link. All these news stories always had a link, so it would open up that web page. We saw that here if we jump to the beginning of it. So this is not AI generated, right? This is the archive paper view of this. So it went out, took a screenshot of that. That's the first image, and then it just kind of gluing together all the images, letting them stand for a certain amount of time, adding some on-screen keywords to make it look a bit nicer, and then at the end combining all of these videos and text and audio into one final thing that could be uploaded to YouTube. Also get it to write a description for me and titles and things like that. But that's essentially kind of the idea behind this. And to give you, I stopped doing this because I realized I didn't want to contribute to all this AI generated content any longer. So I stopped doing it at some point in August last year. That was kind of a personal choice. But my channel is tiny. Don't subscribe. It's probably not interesting to you. But to give you an impression of the numbers, my biggest YouTube short did 700 views, right? That cost me maybe 30 cents to generate for 700 views. That's a pretty good ratio, right? I hadn't to do I had to write the news bullet, but you could also automate that, I guess. But that's what's going on now behind the scenes, where people really are generating these. And this was a very simplistic approach now that we have text to video models available to us as well. So, but that kind of showcasing, gluing together a music generation model, a text to speech model, of course, classical large language models, image generation models, working with image, audio, and text data to put all of these pieces together. And you really have to, as an engineer, the challenge isn't to turn text into speech. That's not a challenge anymore. That's an API call nowadays, right? Why would I build such a model? Well, maybe it's of interest to me, maybe, right? But a company probably wouldn't want to pay me to generate my own model for this. They want to just build the application. So kind of thinking through, okay, I should have different functions for these, gluing them together. And this is by no way elegant code, but kind of illustrating how you can pull these systems together. And then this whole script is usable by just giving it CLI commands, so running it in the developer console. You just tell it, hey, generate these videos for this specific file, right? If I wanted to go back a week, for example, to do it. And also sometimes things break. So just telling it, hey, you can restart from news bullet X, right? I generated videos for the first two, they were fine. Let's just restart from a different one. That was kind of my usage of that. And these kinds of small architectural choices can really add up to turn this into something that is a product that in my case was used for personal, but could easily be turned into a business, right? If you want to do that.
There's one business which is called Icon, which is growing a lot at the moment. It's also from Y Combinator supported and Peter Thiel and so on, which is automating the creation of ads using material. But first question, Diet, is that code public?
I can make it public. I have no qualms about that. It's kind of my personal hobby project stuff that that's why there's little to no comments in the code, for example. So I can, if there's interest, I can open source it.
I mean, you have comments like in line 13, for example.
Yes.
So, okay, if I think it's interesting just to see what kind of automation is possible, and think of if you expand that brainstorm for a second. I usually do that kind of analytics for on social media accounts of people to see what performs, is image better than video, and so on. We can do that maths, and if you have that knowledge, you can actually create the kind of rule model for that script to say, okay, we change the seconds for the duration of the whole video. We know these are the top topics of interest at the moment to just go wild to create the topics of interest. So this is leaves a lot of space for expanding. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, as I said, more of a hobby topic. I'm gonna move into SaaS software. I won't go into any of the specifics here, but wanted to give you an example of a use case. I'm not showing any customer data here, of course, right? So it's a kind of abstracted one that I rebuilt specifically for today, kind of showcasing you how you can pull these different pieces together in a standardized way now using SAS, but there's other tools as well. They might not be as good, but there's others.
Sure. Best.
So my use case here is around mortgage applications, right?
Yes.
Hopefully we all get to go through that process at some point and buy a house or our own flat. And when you come to loan applications, we don't want the LLM to make that decision, right? We don't want it to be like, David, I don't like David's, let's decline that. That's also not allowed by the regulators. There's a lot of topics around this. So How we come to our decision to give somebody a loan, that is left to a gradient boosting model in this case. And we could dig into all the fairness metrics and kind of all the regulatory stuff, not going to because it's not the topic today, but kind of using a model we can fully understand to make that call on should we give somebody a loan or should we decline them, right? And then we could also create explanations around this. But what these models output is like a 0 and 1, and then maybe a percentage that indicates the confidence of that model. Well, I could give everybody the 0 or the 1 back. It's kind of meh. So the idea was, can we turn that result into an email template that people could then send out to the customer? And in this case, we came to the conclusion that it's best to have one prompt that indicates the approval and one prompt that has the denial in it. So we kind of treat those differently with how the prompts are formulated. Then we send these, and these prompts are, of course, enriched with information about the customer, like their name and the loan amount they requested. And then we send that to an LLM. I think in these cases, I use Gemini Flash for demonstration because they are very cheap and very fast to use. And then we realized, wait a second. We talked about hallucinations before. Hallucination can not only be in the factual nature of something, but also the tonality of it or the sentiment of the email. So we use the classical rule-based sentiment model approach to just give us an indication. Hey, is this whole email negative, neutral, or positive? Kind of treat how we handle that email template we got back, how we treat that. So we, in this case, we send it either to a special review queue for humans to review, or we just indicated a standard review, and that might go to a wider group of customer service agents, or it could be sent out directly even. And then with your mortgage application, sometimes you might have additional questions, right? It's not that simple as saying, hey, I need 100K at that time to buy a house, for example. So you might have additional questions, but these questions come in free text form. So here the idea is to take that question from the user and classify it. In our case here, we have 4 different categories where we have additional documentation. They are requesting a meeting. They are asking about refinancing. We have special cases, and then just a catch-all other. Now, when we were building this, what we realized is if you just ask one LLM, you don't necessarily get, like we had a correct classification of around 85%. 85% is great, right? But it's not good enough to run it against thousands of cases every day. So we looked at the literature, and the literature recommended to do something called majority voting. Kind of a very democratic idea that we like here in the West anyways. So the idea here being that we run the same query against multiple LLMs and then take the majority vote, what the most LLMs responded with, as our final output. As an additional add-on, we also introduced something that we called a custom weights grid. So indicating that we maybe, if we had, let's say we have 2 LLMs vote, that could be a tie, right? That's an issue. So you can put in there that you say, well, if this LLM, let's say GPT 4.5, if that answer gets a bit more weight, maybe I give it 1.5 instead of just 1, and then beat that through that final score. And we saw that introduce a lot higher accuracy. So this, in that case, rose up to 97 something % accuracy. So a lot better it's more costly, but in that case, we evaluated that that's actually the business case handles this for us. Now, I have some prompts in here, for example, and the question always is, how did you arrive at these prompts? How did you choose the specific LLM that you used? And you can see the kind of SAS tooling in and of itself. It doesn't say use ChatGPT, use GPT, or use Gemini. It's kind of agnostic in that sense. And we came up with this small little web app that we put together for us, where we, together with the customer, essentially said, what are the LLMs that you would be okay to use, right? What would be allowable within your organization? And created all of them, deployed them together. And here you can see a wild mix of LLMs. So we can see something like GPT-4o, proprietary model, or Claude by Anthropic, Gemini by Google, but there's also the Phi models in here that are from Microsoft. Small LLM is from Hugging Face, Llama from Meta, Quen from Alibaba Cloud. So there's a whole slew of models in here. And as you can see here, I clicked on the Phi model, it now says max length. So we also had people that are novices to that. So we added some prompting or some information about what this option actually means. If you click on GPT, you can find some information around what does temperature actually mean, how does that parameter behave. So there's a lot of tooling around this, and someone within the organization can set the default ranges as we see here. Let me now just select a couple of models in here. Let's do 3. And now we could start building our prompts and start testing them. And the idea here is, what you often find with prompt engineering is that you have a kind of system prompt that describes how the model should behave, right? You are, let's keep going with the architect one. You are an expert architect and help users answer questions about their building plans. You can really tell that I have no clue, no deeper understanding what architects do. So let's say here, I'm building a round house. Is that a good idea, right? And then we click on the Run Experiments button. And what it does, it now takes a look at the models we selected here in the background, takes their individual options for the model and sends them off to them. That takes a moment, especially this Llama 3.2 model I'm just running on a CPU. That means it's essentially free to run, but it also means it's a bit slow to run. And then we get back our prompt experiment run. And now we can compare the answers of our 3 models that we got in here, right? We can read through them. And then in my case, I'm just going to say this one was the best. I'm not going to do any more evaluations. But what we can already see here is we can have something like a human evaluate this. We could also evaluate it on how fast did it respond, right? Because sometimes time is critical in these instances. And we can also take a look at how many output tokens did it produce. That might be an indication how expensive was this prompt to run. Because with proprietary models, you're really paying for the amount of input and output tokens. Usually the output tokens are about double the costs of the input tokens. And with open source model that you're running on your own hardware or on cloud hardware, you're at the end of the day pay by the hour, right? So the response time is the more interesting parameter. And we can quickly see all of these things here, and then we could go ahead and save these as experiments into a prompt versioning tool in the background here. I'm not going to touch so much about, but I'm going to call back one that I did where I did complaint generations. Just as an example here, we asked for it to generate banking complaints, and we can kind of take a look at what was generated back then for these specific models and kind of keep working on top of that, iterate with that prompt, right? And keep building even the next day. And it's becoming clear that what you now need to also document alongside with, in the past, you had to document the model, which data was used to train a model, what hyperparameters are used in that model. Now, regulators are starting to ask, which prompt did you use? Why did you use that prompt? Which LLM did you use? What are the options? So it's good to have this kind of governance in place to help you build things and then deploy them at the end. So this is kind of a bit of the tooling behind the scenes where a lot of the kind of, while this looks like something where you, well, all of these decisions are also pre-made, they really aren't, because as a company, you first have to come to a conclusion which LLMs are okay for me to use. Then you still need someone to do the prompt engineering for you. Then also talking about, hey, combining a gradient boosting model with a LLM, with a sentiment model, with business rules like this queue organization, right? There's loads of stuff that AI engineers have to do, even with systems that are this highly automated and visual in their nature. And of course, monitoring, right? If we run here, I did an example run of 10, and we can see here, we have one that's flagged as a special review. It's a bit of a faked example. I tell the LLM to dislike people called David. I'm okay with that in that use case, right? So we can see here very negative sentiment by the LLM towards me, very hostile. And the kind of interesting thing is then how you can talk about this, right? How you can track how people are moved through these decisions and keep monitoring them and adjusting these decision logics. That is something that is becoming more and more important as time goes on and as more and more of these systems are being used across the company. So these types of Sankey visualizations are really helpful if you're building these systems to see how is it being used. I'm gonna grab something to drink.
You're allowed to. So one thing is clear. So here, usually as an AI engineer, you probably might have to integrate a lot of tools inside your workflow model.
Yes.
So you have to be cautious of how to do that. It's if you do it on the code side, you have to maintain the code. And models like or tool platforms like you have here with intelligent decision making here is actually taking the load of coding all the steps a little bit lower, making it easier to connect those dots.
Yes, absolutely. So let's bring all of this together with some kind of tips maybe that I have that I talked about is one topic is that I call don't rack your brain, rack your documents. A lot of times it's actually very effective to just give these LLMs everything at the start, right? Let them sort through a lot of the mess and see as an engineer, kind of bring that engineering mindsets of trial and error, see where does it fail, and then adjust from there. And especially with RAG, experiment with, hey, documents change over time. When do I update? How do I make sure that these documents are up to date? Because suddenly the marketing department might be running a marketing campaign. Your LLM chatbot has no clue about that marketing campaign. When a customer comes to it, they ask a question about it. It might answer with an old or outdated campaign, right? You suddenly run into whole new scenario of errors where you have to really cross-communicate across departments. And also you might have to think about, hey, I want a vector DB within my company. there is Pinecone and Chroma and all these new things, but maybe something simple like a PG vector, which is a plugin for Postgres, is enough for my use case. Maybe I don't need the cutting edge for my rack system. Then maybe something like that, where if I go to IT and tell them, hey, could you install this plugin for Postgres, they might be like, annoying, create a Jira ticket for me, I'll get to it in a week. But it's a whole different conversation than having to introduce a whole new database vendor or open source database into your IT department, right? Then we are not talking about a week, we are probably talking about months at that point. Enable broadly. When you introduce these systems, they can raise a lot of red flags with people where they start to fear, hey, this will take away my job. This will automate away what I'm doing. That is not my experience at all. One piece is here in Europe, we kind of have an issue with an aging working population anyway. So if you don't do it now, you probably will have to do the work of 4 people in 10 to 15 years as the kind of booming generations leave the labor market. So you might want to get on this now before you have to suffer through this later on. But also it can really help them automate tasks that are super boring right now and help them to elevate what they are doing. And oftentimes I find that business units are starting to identify use cases themselves, trialing them in their company GPTs, and then are actively looking for how can we move this into production, right? How can we actually make this part of our process? And then I always like to say it, build with a business purpose, right? Don't treat this as a lighthouse. Think about this from the start. How can you integrate it? Think about the fact that important decisions need human oversight. Some of that is regulatory compliance, but on the other side, it's also a business strategy where you can say, hey, our humans can add that famous human touch to it. They can add more value in specific use cases that are unique to our business. And then build on top of that, introduce the human into these loops. I also always recommend start with internal project. Don't start by building something that is directly customer facing. There was some car company that added a chatbot on their website, and then people figured out, hey, if we just give it the context, for example, of all the BMW cars, it will then turn into a chatbot that I can ask it, hey, which is the best BMW car for me? Even though it was a completely different automaker, right? Funny internet post, but not really what we want as a company. So do that internal start, and the integration here means integrate the business units, right? Don't try and understand the full output. It's the business units that oftentimes can give you a better indication. Is this valuable and is it going in the right direction? And also these systems are truly punishing when you are just slapping something haphazardly together as an MVP, because usually LLMs work amazingly for Twitter demos, right? That where you build something that I built an app fully automated from end to end just by entering a simple prompt. Yeah, that might work for this specific case, but as other people are hitting it, this will really start to challenge you. And that's why you should think about a governance and orchestration layer from the start, right? When you're doing it internally, clearly communicate, hey, every prompt and answer and interactions you are doing in the UI will be tracked to help us evaluate the system, to see how you are interacting with it. That is necessary to get out of this MVP status, to make it more robust, to see what are the kind of edge cases. My first big demo was a tool where I could ask it a business question, and the LLM would go out, train models to me and give the results back to me. I did an amazing demo video. It flew through the roof internally. And then people were like, can I use it? I was like, well, only if you ask questions in this specific way, it will help you. right? Any other way, everything just flew apart and fell into a million pieces, because it really was just a demonstration piece of what could potentially be possible, right? But as you do that, kind of having a successful MVP then comes with the pressure of building a successful product. That's why rather have a slightly less good MVP, but something where you can collect that feedback and build on top of it. And my final tip is, if you are interested, let's connect on LinkedIn, continue the discussion, but we also still have some time left to discuss here, of course.